to.
I can do it. I can do it.
Awesome.
Oh, hey, Nikki, how are you?
Good to see you.
Likewise. All right.
I'm so happy that everyone is able to unmute at their leisure. So this is good. I set the meeting up right. Well, thank you so much to my fellow partners over at Flosum. Today, we're going to be talking about DevOps and the context of just like product overview. Okay. What does Flosum do? So it's going to be more of like a richer demonstration as opposed to more of a philosophical conversation, but we're going to get into some of that later with the headless momentum that is going on in Salesforce and how Flosum can help, and opinions that I value very much from Scott and Joe, as they are experts in governance. And so I thank you both for educating our community group here. To all of our group members, the recording will be posted to our YouTube channel, and I will be sure to add that in the chat here so you all can access it at your leisure whenever you wish. But I thank you for coming out to support us. You will find that I added a new in-person social to our events page because I would love to see you all. Some of you are going to Dreamforce, which is very exciting. How many of y'all are going to Dreamforce? Okay, put something in the chat if you're going. Then you might be able to find each other. And I hope that you do. If you're presenting, I hope that all of your presentations go well, and San Francisco has beautiful weather for you. And I want to hear all about your Dreamforce memoirs at our Dreamforce after party at Gabriella's Bistro, where we usually meet. So without further ado, I don't want to take any more time away from Scott and Joe because they have excellent content and demos for us to witness today. So thank you, gentlemen, for coming for us.
Great. Well, thank you, Brittany. So I'll just take a few moments to set the context before we dive into the capabilities of Flosum. And thank you very much for having us here. Anybody, if you have questions, you can feel free to raise your hand, and we'll try and catch those. You can pop a message in chat, or if you really want to, speak up. If the bigger the group gets, we might have to kind of hold back on the live questions spur of the moment. But if you've got one that's burning, we'll give it a try here. So we're talking today about Salesforce DevOps. Joe, you want to advance the slides a bit? Joe Morse, I'll let you introduce yourself first, Joe.
Hey guys, Joe Morse. I lead our solutions engineering team here at Flosum. I also spent about 14 years at Salesforce itself, and I live a mile and a half from Salesforce Tower. So hopefully I'll see many of you at Dreamforce.
Yeah, and it looks like you're having an after party, according to Brittany. So
I wish I had more than 500 square feet of glorious real estate here in San Francisco. But
got it. And I am Scott Cotter, account director at Flosum. That's a sales and account management role. I've been with the company about 7 years, been in the ecosystem about 12 or 13, and happy to talk to you today. So we are going to hit agenda slide coming up next. You got the intros done. We're going to talk a little bit about why the company was founded, why this flagship product was built. It's probably going to be preaching to the choir, given the audience here. And then we'll move into the demo. So next slide, Joe. Nope, I think, okay, Salesforce is different. Next here, click one, I've got to build. So Salesforce, the message here, Salesforce is different than .NET or Java or a lot of other platforms that you guys probably have in your enterprise. And there's reasons that those reasons kind of trip up a lot of normal DevOps tools. And in fact, Salesforce, back when the company was founded about 12, 13 years ago, it was changesets and scripts were the best that Salesforce would give you. Your enterprise IT group would probably say, go use Git or ADO, GitHub, or GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever the enterprise standard was. And that didn't do Salesforce so well too. And the downside there is this Salesforce lower environment, sandboxes, they get out of sync really easy. As fast as you refresh them, they are out of sync with the velocity that most organizations are affecting change with Salesforce. It's very difficult to keep them in sync. We'll talk about the risks of getting out of sync, but it's basically you're pushing along stuff that's old, outdated versions of components. causing and introducing merge conflicts that you don't want. Next click. Profiles and permissions. I've talked to many organizations that are afraid to even try and automate deployment of profiles and permissions just because they can have such huge damage when they do. Some companies will just do it manually, each step along in your dev box, in your integration box, QA, UAT, and so on. Next up. The citizen developer. This isn't a phrase that I hear as much at Salesforce anymore, but the idea here is the power of Salesforce. You empower business analysts, stakeholders in the different lines of business to actually be part of the development process. These are not classically trained developers. They don't necessarily understand all of the ins and outs of proper release management and managing development cycles. That is something that's a little bit challenging as well. Next. Overwrites, they happen all the time. In fact, once you go from an organization that has just prod and one lower sandbox, you start introducing multiple sandboxes, parallel development, maybe external consultants. You set yourself up for a challenge in managing these overwrites. Next up. Manual steps, you never can get away. Even with a great tool like Flosum, or your enterprise IT guys will build YAML scripts and whatever other kind of automations they have, you can never get away from the fact that there are going to be manual steps for development, which introduce human error, could be forgotten altogether, and cause problems. Next up. Dependencies, environment-specific variables, things like that. There is all kinds of little odd uniqueness in Salesforce that changesets don't know about. Salesforce's own inbuilt tools. Git doesn't understand Salesforce, so it can't pick them up. So these are a collection of some of the most common things why releases for Salesforce get tripped up. And frankly, these are the guiding principles for how we built our DevOps product. Okay, next slide, Joe. Click. So we've built some functionality that you're going to see in the product today. It would take us hours to go through every one of these in depth, but we've got some abilities to see the differences in your sandbox, pick up that drift, as it's often called, and help you keep those sandboxes in sync. We've got merge and conflict resolution logic that we built from the ground up. We looked at all the different Salesforce component structures, Lightning Web components, profiles, normal metadata, Aura bundles, all these different things. And for each different component type, we've got the logic in there where Flosum conflict resolution understands what is a true conflict, what is not, and helps developers and admins get through that. And then some special stuff to handle profiles and permissions as well. Next, Joe. Kind of the next level, aside from just the environment itself, looking at the functions that you need to do. Help prevent overwrites from happening. We've got a utility called overwrite protection that is going to do a pre-check before a deploy and warn you potential overwrite. What do you want to do about it? Pre-deploy fix. We'll look at your branch and find the things that are likely to cause a validation failure all in one big swoop and give you the opportunity to remediate on the spot rather than kicking it back to a developer and introducing hours or days of delay. And then we've got some utilities for those environment-specific values and variables and things like that. Next, Joe. Finally, the automation and the deployment part. We've got native pipelines in there. You don't need to go out and get Jenkins or GitHub Actions or things like that. We've got it baked into the product, and it's native Salesforce, easy for a Salesforce team to manage. We can handle record-based config, which is more and more important. This is like all your data configuration stuff that comes along with CPQ, with the old Velocity or Salesforce Industries Now deployments. If anybody's in financial services, you got things like Encino, pharma, you've got Viva, all these things where you got to move data records along as part of the deployment, not just metadata. And then finally, we got the rollback, the two-step, any release, any org, anytime, the undo button, so to speak, for a deployment. So these are some of the things that we baked into the product and built over the past 10, 12 years. And I'm going to hand it over to Joe now, and we're going to jump into, well, I think there's one or two more slides, and then we're going to jump into the product.
Yeah, fair enough. I think, you look at all of these things that we've had to build. Many people are accustomed to kind of getting the duct tape and baling wire out and cobbling together a bunch of changes and tooling to do Salesforce DevOps. I think Salesforce has encouraged that in the past with originally their Ant migration tool, and then they made an attempt with changesets to consolidate things into one intuitive tool, and that didn't work out. Now they're trying again with DevOps Center. I think this list kind of acknowledges that there's very much room out there for purpose-built Salesforce deployment tools and governance tools, and that's one of the reasons why Flosum exists. And really, to me, the root cause of this is this dichotomy that Salesforce has introduced. I bet you there are some of you folks on the call who just prefer to download metadata and work on it in your IDE, push it to a branch, and work with version control. And there's probably still others who prefer to go and work in an org. The reality of Salesforce is that you work in an org and you work outside of an org, and the two things have to come together. And that's where traditional DevOps platforms fall apart, and that's why we built Flosum the way that we did. So we thought today we'd take an interesting detour. Some of you may have seen Flosum before. We're very much known for a couple of our native products. We have a Salesforce native version of DevOps. We also have an off Salesforce platform version of it that we're going to go through today. They're functionally roughly equivalent. They do roughly the same things. It's just that now we have the power and speed and application residency options that come with being off platform as well. So we're going to take you through a walkthrough of Flosum Cloud DevOps. We might catch a glimpse of the tool that does sandbox seeding and record-based configuration as well. I think as we come into any Salesforce practice, like I'm a Salesforce practitioner, my whole team consists of people who've gotten their hands dirty with Salesforce over the years, and I think that describes everyone in this room to some extent, or this virtual room. We like to look at the Salesforce org and the Salesforce practice and try to figure out where you might sit on this spectrum of Salesforce DevOps maturity. We work with Salesforce customers and practices who are just coming off changesets or just getting started with their implementation. They have some basic tooling and process and not much of a DevOps culture in place. We work with companies who have some tooling, have some process, and may want to consolidate or restructure it. And then we work with large Salesforce practices that have a lot of things. Sometimes it's duct tape and baling wires. Sometimes it's a set of enterprise-grade tools that they put together in a nice crafted way. We've built Flosum DevOps to kind of slot in at any point in the spectrum and move with you as you mature. That's one of the reasons we built it the way we did, which I'll take through here. This version of our cloud apps actually works outside of the Salesforce platform. We run it. We also allow some of our customers to run it themselves in containerized infrastructure. And at the end of the day, what you get is what we call a Flosum cloud tenant. And that tenant can have a DevOps application that services the metadata deployments between your sandboxes and your orgs. It can have a data migrator, which can do sandbox seeding and move record-based configuration as well. We also have a cloud backup and archive solution that runs there, and there are actually more and more apps in this tenant that are either here or coming, but we're going to focus on Cloud DevOps today, and we're going to look through the basics of how it does a very simple deployment. Let's pull some things out of a sandbox and move it along. But important to note is that we're not going to be the only tool in town. You very likely have your enterprise tools like Jira for your tickets, or an IDE you need to work with, or a version control system, or Excel queue for testing. And so DevOps will gladly participate with its integrations in those larger schemes of things. But we're going to focus on working in this cloud tenant today. We're going to see a quick demo of how you take some changes out of Sandbox and move things on to the next environment there. So what we'll do is we'll start with a very typical Salesforce environment strategy where we're working in individual sandboxes. We've built a feature in one of those sandboxes. We'll pull it out into version control. We'll do some Salesforce specific things on it. and then we'll move it along and maybe even merge it into a release. And so many people are used to kind of going one feature at a time all the way to production if they're in changesets, and we can certainly do that, but we can also help get you to that next level of governance where you're being very, very disciplined about your user stories, getting them into releases, and doing good work on it. So let's spend some time taking a look at Flosum Cloud DevOps here. I'm going to kill this from slideshow mode and move over here. I guess this is the first screen you'll typically see when you start to interact with Flosum's cloud platform. This is our global settings app. It's where we manage security, user management, access management, and a whole bunch of other things. But the key thing to take away from this is that Cloud DevOps sits alongside all of these other apps that have a role in the governance of your Salesforce orgs. Like we talked about, Data Migrator will seed sandboxes and help move record-based configuration. Backup and archive will give you protection, enterprise-grade protection for your Salesforce org and let you do very easy restores and archiving of data. And the DevOps tool itself is meant to move metadata and manage your deployments. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of things. Now, I know that, Nikki, you've got a question around pricing and other pieces. One thing to note is that sometimes a consultant will buy this for their own purposes and run it as kind of a managed service. Other times it'll come as part of what your customer has done with us. They may buy it directly from us for their ongoing needs. A lot of times consultants do project-based work, and a tool like this is useful in that context. But longer term, if that customer is going to buy a tool, it's got to be useful to them for ongoing deploys, likely after the project is done, if they keep doing customization. So that said, this tool can handle multiple production orgs. We have a structure that facilitates that we call topologies, and that's very, very easy to do. You connect different orgs and you assign different apps to it, you assign different permissions and what have you. So I think there's a difference between the technology piece and the economics piece of it, which we can always talk a little bit about in the QA section. But key thing here is, we got multi-orgs here. Let's take a look at the DevOps tool itself. So I'll pop over here to Cloud DevOps. What we've started on here is we call the Insights tab. This is a little bit like a Salesforce dashboard or report, and it's going to have key stats from your deployments. Now this, let me flip back here. This tenant is fairly new. I just recently connected orgs to it, so it's not going to have a ton of things in here, but it will give you a quick overview of your deployment statistics, your version control statistics, and more. The first good news about hopefully the folks like this idea, is that Flosum DevOps has its own inbuilt version control system. You don't need to interact with Git to do Salesforce deployments. You can, but we don't require it by any means. And so we're going to work through Flosum's version control and take a look at it. We've got our org connections here. So I have, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different environments stood up to it. Once we connect these environments, it's going to start retrieving metadata from them and doing other operations on it. But really work starts, in a couple of places. I've done some work in Dev 1 here. And if we look at Dev 1, it's got a lot of metadata changes coming through. The most recent, I think, was about 9 hours ago. Salesforce came and updated some things. We've got a quick and easy way to go explore metadata that was updated in the org or what day it was created, filtering by type and by users. There's a few other things we can do here as well. You can see that I'm running retrieve a lot on this org to go and get the latest metadata. There are ways to do things like require a certain amount of code coverage. But I think what we came here for is to go and get some metadata out of this. I just wanted you to have a look at this, and that really starts with a branch. And so if you've never used a version control system before, the concept of a branch may be a little bit foreign to you, but think of it as kind of like a change set on steroids, right? It's going to be the packaging mechanism by which you take your changes and move it along. And for us, it's very, very easy to create a branch. We basically start by giving it a name. So I've done some work in Dev 1 here to have some account prioritization fields and other tooling deployed. So I'll call this, feature branch, account prioritization. You'll have some sort of naming convention that's there. Now, in Cloud DevOps, we've got to choose a source branch, and it kind of inherits some attributes from that source branch. I'll choose main here. And this is probably associated with the user story. So I know many in the room have used Jira to track their work before, maybe ServiceNow, maybe ADO, maybe Agile Accelerator. I happen to have Jira here. And so I'll choose that integration in my cloud project. And I know that my story here is CIC 29. And by doing this, I'm going to create this branch that's going to represent my change that I'm going to pull out of my Dev1 sandbox and move on to my QA sandbox. Notice that it's really empty right now. It doesn't have any components in it. It kind of inherits components from main. So if I toggle this over to all, it's going to give me a way to compare against the baseline that I have, but I haven't added anything to this yet. One thing it has done is it's added an association with that Jira story here. So as I go and build this branch and then deploy it to subsequent environments, it's going to update that Jira ticket and keep that association. But for me, really the core goal here is to go and choose the metadata that I want to put on this branch that represents my feature, do some work on it, and deploy it along. And so many of you, as you have used changesets before, you've probably pulled things from an org. Here, we do something very similar with this add component piece. And the add component piece simply lets you pick an environment that's going to be your source. It's going to start showing you all of the components that have been changed or modified or are new on this. And the goal here is to then filter it down. So I don't want the system user stuff. I just want my stuff. It's easy enough to filter it down by type, but I think what's going to be most important is to get what was changed in the last 24 hours and do some quick sorting here so that I can see exactly what I changed in the last 24 hours. And so it's been a little more than 24 hours for me to go and change this. So I may need to do a little bit of pagination here, but this is going to make it possible to then go and cherry pick the things that impact my features. So I happen to have, an account layout that I changed. There are some custom fields on it, and I might choose one or two of those. It's going to go and change some of the report types and other pieces that are modified. This little modified button here makes it much, much easier to go and get things. I've got an account planning helper here that I've added. It's a new flow. And a whole bunch of other things that are going to be a part of that as well. I changed some Apex classes as well. So those things comprise my my metadata. It's going to ask me to give a commit message. And now when I do that, it's going to take that metadata, run a little job to go and commit that metadata to my branch. So that's in progress right now. It's pulling it from the sandbox. It already completed that. And now it's synchronizing this with my Git server, which is optional. You can see that it just has my changes on here that I've added. So it's got the two Apex classes, the page layout. It's got a field as well as a flow. If I need to go back and add things, I can always do that. And I think this is a little bit easier than that traditional screen you see in changesets. But let's say that I know I had a permission set. It's very easy to go in and run this and just do a quick query of permission set and then do a quick search. So it's meant to be much, much easier than your traditional DevOps tools. If you had to pull these down to your local machine and then commit them to Git, it would be much, much harder. So Brittany had an interesting question there. Did I have to set up a listener to capture everything that was modified? And so in other words, did I have to set up anything in the org or something different than that?
Yes, I was wondering, in Flosum, if you had to configure it to listen for those particular changes, or does it just surface those changes for you automatically, everything that you change?
Good question. So it actually does the latter. It will listen to you. You start a retrieve. You can run an ad hoc retrieve too. So if I know exactly what I wanted to go get, I'll do that. But every hour, it's going to run and get the latest, and you can trigger it to go and get specific things or just the latest. So that's automatic. Nothing in the org at all. We'll just connect to the org and do that independently of it.
Wow. Okay.
Good question, though. It makes it a lot easier because I imagine people are used to having to connect their IDEs to the org and pull things out. This is using those same mechanisms. It's just doing it for you automatically and automating it on the server side instead of relying on your desktop setup. All right. So, if I went to deploy this or validate this against the target org, it probably wouldn't work, right? How many people have gone out there and tried to validate or deploy and gotten an error and a bunch of other things that just didn't work, right? It happens. And so what we'll often do is have to do work on this branch just to make sure. I'm going to remove one thing. Give me a second here because I just realized I did it the wrong way. I think how many people have in the room, just like a show of hands, maybe you've created a change set, you put a page layout on that change set and you forgot about 6 fields. And then you went to upload the change set and validated the change set, and Salesforce gives you an error and it only tells you about the very first thing. And then you have to do that whole process again through all of those missing fields. That's a very common thing to have happen with Salesforce. It's not very good at dependencies. So we've included a series of utilities on here that make this easier. Scott mentioned pre-deploy fix. In the cloud version of pre-deploy fix, what you're doing is telling it about your target organization. And it's going to go check for a whole bunch of problems at once. And so we've got some operations queued here on the branch. And so this pre-deploy fix search is going to run. And what it's doing is it's analyzing your branch against your target org. It's searching for dependency issues and API version issues. And it's come back here and found a couple of things. We do have some API version issues in this with the Apex classes. I created them in 62. It should be 67. This will also detect a situation where you have a sandbox in preview mode and you create something and maybe you're an API version ahead. These I don't have to do anything about right now because they're younger and that can stay. So I won't deal with that now. But the other thing it's done is it has gone and analyzed those dependencies and it did it recursively. So instead of having to go and add those dependencies back, one by one, this thing will go out and retrieve those dependencies en masse. And so you can tell it to go straight back to dev 1 and tell it what to go get. And so I happen to know that, this field and this field are the ones that I'm going to struggle with. And the page layout is not going to have some other things on it. You could go and add all of these. I can add planning status and planning target and a few other pieces. And it's going to ask me to commit these. So it's kind of automatic dependency retrieval and commit. So now if I look back at the branch here, and look at the metadata, it's going to have all that new stuff on it. And it's probably going to eventually start paginating here. So the idea, thank you, Brandon, that would never happen. We've never had to go recursively through a deployment to go and find a million dependencies. We wanted it to be a consolidated set of utilities there, right? Now, I'm going to go do one thing. We can still go and add components from orgs too. So I know that I happen to have a flow I want in this branch from dev 1. So it's easy enough to go and get the actual flow itself. And sometimes those things won't show up in dependency checks because they may be soft dependencies. But we could keep building this branch, and the key point there is that this branch is reusable. We might deploy it somewhere, realize we're missing something, go back and get something. We might need to do some rework, go back and get something. So that's going to be the first big difference between Flosum and Git-based tools that you notice is that we're a little more forgiving because you can add new things onto the branch. The other thing we can add onto a branch is destructive changes. And so it's very easy to add destructive changes as just a metadata here. I don't have any to add here, but we can very easily do it. We've got ad hoc comparison tools here on the branch. So if we wanted to look at the branch history, it's very easy to dig into here and look at the commit history and look at the old version, new version. If you happen to have it, this was a brand new ad, so it isn't there. So as you make these changes, we keep a nice history of those things. With pre-deploy fix, we're going to automate a lot of the getting of those things. The other situation we run into is that when your sandbox is out of sync, we may have started with an earlier version of the metadata. And that's what happened here. I have an older out of sync sandbox, but that's okay because I've got a tool here that will very dynamically and quickly compare against my target environment. So if my process is to deploy something to UA or QA just next, it will let me run a very quick ad hoc analysis against QA called overwrite protection. And what it's doing here is it's looking at everything that's on this branch. It's comparing it to see whether it exists in that target environment. And if it exists, it'll compare the two and flag any differences that I have to reconcile. So if for those of you who've used a Git-based version control system with Salesforce, this often requires you to maintain a branch that represents an environment and compare a branch to a branch, which is cumbersome and funky. One of the reasons we built our own version control system for Salesforce is so we can compare it directly with an environment. And that's what it's doing now, and it's going to crunch a little bit and show me the results here, and I'll show you a bit about how we compare and merge in Flosum DevOps here. This may take a minute because the sandbox may be a little slow to respond. I think some of the Salesforce pods get a little bit out of whack this time of the morning, but we'll go from there, and then we'll see the compare and merge. That said, it's a chance for us to pause for questions while we're waiting for this. Oh, it just finished. So if nobody, of course, the minute I ask for questions, it's going to say it. So we've run overwrite protection. And what this has done is it's gone through and identified which of these things are new, which of these things exist in both places and are different. So you've got filters up here where you can talk about who modified it, filter down by the type, but really the most important one here is this one. I want to just focus on what's different between my branch and that target environment. And so for each one of these, you can go through and yeah, Brandon, you've just identified something critical. So Brandon said, overwrite protection sounds like it would be helpful if you're working with somebody who sneaks in edits in prod. I would say in any target environment. So somebody might work directly in QA. It happens at Salesforce, right? The other situation that happens is when you have parallel development, people might deploy a branch before you. And this will help you identify conflicts, whether they deployed the right way or the unofficial way. But this actually does it in a really interesting way. So here's the flow. And we've got a difference between the flows. On the right side is the flow in my branch. On the left side is the flow in the target org. And it's really collapsed all of the lines that aren't really things we need to highlight. Now it's showing the XML now. But for something like a flow, we have a handy flow diagram editor where you can compare target and source. And you can see that I added a bunch of branch and other pieces. You can easily turn this off and compare the raw XML. We do let you merge things, but for a flow, I'm probably going to let this just go through, right? Mark this one as resolved. What I really care about is this other set of things. So here we have a page layout. And on the right side in my branch, I see that I have a couple of things in red here that don't exist. So somebody went and added fields to this page layout in the target, and it ended up creating a situation where I stand a chance of overwriting that. And I think those are legitimate fields to have. So I'm going to add them to my branch here. I've got this down here in orange, so the behavior is a little different. Somebody made this field required, and mine is edit. And then I have stuff in green, which is new stuff. But you see how it highlighted just the changes here and let you focus in on what's actually a conflict. The other thing it's doing is it's really taken an intelligent view to the Salesforce metadata. Salesforce does strange things with metadata. They put a lot of weird white space variations and ordering variations in it, and we take care of that in this editor. And so, Nikki, you're hitting this just right. We want to pull in partial changes. And what we want to do is pull it in from a target org in this case, as opposed to another version control branch. So we'll mark that one as done. Now let's take a look at these Apex classes. So I have my class here, and look, somebody modified this. Brandon, just like you said, but they did it in an appropriate way. They started in Dev 2 and deployed changes to this class off to this environment. So I'll pull in that piece, apply the change, and then mark resolved. Now let's go look at the test class for this. We want to get test coverage. And so even though I've altered this, I want to bring, the test method into mine. So now I can commit all these changes. Tell people I ran overwrite protect or put a little more detailed message in there. And you can see that we have these things updated. It tells us about the last commit, and it's keeping that list of things that we put in there. So if you go back to the branch and take a look at the metadata, it will show you exactly where some of the changes came from. So that pre-deploy fix kind of saves you from dependency heck, as well as versions of metadata issues. The overwrite protection, make sure you're not going to step on other people or step on the automated changes that Salesforce makes in an org. From here, we can do lots of different things. This branch, you have a lot of different tools on it. You can merge it with other branches into a release. You can let it sit, put it through a peer review before you do the merge. There's a whole process that lets you do that. But for our purposes, we could very easily just run a quick validate and deploy against an org. And so if we take a look at, show you the validate screen here. This will let you go and pick the metadata that you want to deploy. So that's another big difference between Flosum and Git. You can be very selective, and since we can reuse these branches, you might deploy this once, do some rework, and then do a deploy again and only pick the changes that you want to pick. So I can leave that flow off of it if I want. From here, it'll tell you which org do you want to go to. I'll pick my QA org. We don't have any destructive changes, but then it's going to give you some very, very familiar options around running unit tests. So if I'm going to, run specified tests, I can tell which test to run. If I'm going to run relevant tests, I'll have it run there. And then we have that special handling that Scott mentioned for profiles and permission sets. So I'll turn that on. And what that's going to do is trim down the permission set to only what's related to the branch. But roughly, when you run this thing, it's going to run a job here. This should queue and run for a few minutes. We'll see how quick the QA sandbox responds here, but that's going to do a validate. And from there, we could do a quick deploy or other deployment if we want. And we support these manual validations. Scott did mention pipelines as well. We also have those. You can deploy in those as well. And I've got a very easy one here that we could run that pipeline through, and it would do a validate and then a deploy. So there's a whole automation layer in here that makes that thing easier. And there's a whole bunch under the hood there that we could add to this. But that's a very simple kind of front to back deployment with Flosum. For just that quick account prioritization branch, and we can watch that deployment here, and if it comes back with any problems, it will tell you about it like this. And so I happen to have a missing field there, so I'll go back and correct that with pre-deploy fix again and run the deployment as well. Scott also mentioned that we do support deployment rollbacks, and so from one of these records, if it succeeded, we could undeploy it. But you have a whole kind of compendium of tools within Flosum, including the DevOps piece for the metadata. We also have a handy tool here to go and push data from one instance to another, whether that's seeding a sandbox like this or deploying your CPQ templates for record-based configuration. And then on top of that, we've got all the other apps that you saw in this home screen too, including a brand new one here for audit and compliance. So we'll track who made what metadata change where and give you a report and record of what it came from. So at a high level, that's Flosum. But Scott, I think maybe we open it up for questions or discussion points here.
I see a few comments in chat. And I think we've addressed them all as they come up. But yeah, you got the basic walkthrough of seeing how Flosum can automate and some of the special add-ons we have to overcome some of those unique Salesforce challenges. If nobody has any questions,
actually, there's one more that I had for you all. So now that we're recording and we can have a discussion in front of everybody. So many of our group members have just completed their headless workshop, where we are connecting AI assistants and LLM straight into Salesforce using an MCP connector. And my question is an LLM connector going to create a governance risk in my org? And how can I mitigate that? Is there any way that Flosum can help me?
Yeah, let's talk about that. For years, people have been talking about Salesforce becoming Oracle. And that's not just a cultural phenomenon. I think, the last 10 years have seen the rise of many startup systems and now AI-driven startup systems that kind of want to cut the UI off of Salesforce and treat it as a backend. But that said, I think one important thing to think about LLMs and AI, or at least the current iteration of AI, is that they're built on a foundation not just of data, but of strong process tools, right? So I don't think that the need for governance goes away. I think it changes, and I think it becomes more acute. You're still going to have those processes that you run in Salesforce, even if they are successful in cutting off the UI of Salesforce, which I don't think there will be. But you're still going to have the need to have solid processes in that org, solid data structures, solid automations. It's just that you're going to have a pace of data change being driven that's possibly higher and a little more error prone. You may also have a pace of development change that happens. And so when I think about how AI interacts with a Salesforce practice, I take it from a DevOps perspective. And, we see a lot of things feeding the top of your funnel in DevOps. Like the most capable among us are using, I hate the word vibe coding, but they're using LLMs to augment the metadata they're feeding into their DevOps. And that creates a big governance concern. That creates the need for augmented tooling and other pieces. Now, there's another category I like to think of. There are kind of agents and LLMs being used for both inform DevOps as well as observability. The observability piece is really interesting. You don't want them changing things. You want them observing and advising. I think the DevSecOps assistance, that's where we've got to be very, very careful. I guess the rhetorical question I put out there is, do you want an LLM making a deployment decision on the quality of your component? Or does that belong in the hands of a human being or the deterministic automation, right? So I think there's a good governance question. I don't think AI is going to blow this all out of the water. And if AI is sitting there pushing prod, well, the governance question is, what access does that AI have? What are they allowed to do? And that's for those observability tools. And by the way, the other angle to this, which confuses everyone, is that we're also deploying Salesforce agents. So Salesforce itself is an AI-driven platform, right? So I think it's a profound question, Brittany. It's interesting to see Parker Harris finally come out and admit that cutting the head off of Salesforce is okay. Years ago, Salesforce went API first, and people loved that. But I think the reality of it is we need an LLM to do some work for us, but we need something to govern that work, whether it's the DevOps work or the data work in there. And you need something that helps you recover very quickly, whether that's a metadata protection tool like DevOps, or more importantly for LLMs, I think a data protection tool like data backup. So if you have an LLM pointed at your production org and somebody who's overprivileged at the LLM layer goes in and tells it, update the close date on every opportunity in the system, and it does it, well, you need to recover from that quickly. And so that's what the need of the governance tool drives for us. At Flosum, we try to take a very cautious approach on AI, putting AI in our tools. It's always going to be optional, and you're always going to make a final decision, right? As opposed to just letting a robot make a decision. Scott?
I will add to that, just sharing. So I work with a lot of customers, many in financial services or regulated industries, and probably everybody on this call, your company's talking about, how am I going to make AI make things better? And when you look at it from specifically a developer or development release flow perspective, I've got one particular customer that I think is pretty bleeding edge, but they've got agentic for intake. So it interviews the business user and writes the specs and defines the requirement. They have agentic that is then making simple configurative changes in a scratch org. The agent then is also writing the test scripts. The agent is defining what the release notes should be. But they've gotten to, and then they also have agentic for doing reviews of branches. So doing those peer reviews and code reviews. And yes, that's great because it takes a lot of hours out of billable consultants or makes staff more productive. But they also, to Joe's point, have said, I'm not going to let agentic take it from end to end. I've got to have that governance and safety. So they'll kick it into the normal checks and balances that are part of their DevOps release process today. So looking for things like, did I over permission a profile? Did the agent do that unintentionally, or not unintentionally, but without knowing better? So you've got that governance still that's part of the process that catches things in the lower environments, and it's got human intervention in there. Plus, they will never they'll never let the agent do the review of the code that was generated by the agent. So you got simple governance things like that you want on the lower end. In fact, I think Amazon recently admitted that an outage.
They're having humans do peer review of any generated code. Yeah, exactly. I think Amazon's having humans do peer reviews of AI generated code and a senior guy doing peer reviews of it. So It's an interesting topic. I guess I not to get academic, I'd go back to some core concepts from automation theory that I've heard publicized. If any of you read folks like Cory Doctorow, the guy who termed the word enshittification, you'll hear this a lot. But there's the concept of a centaur, which you remember from Greek mythology is a human on a horse's body. So the machine is making the human better at what they're doing. And all of you who are using these LLM tools to be more productive in your coding and you have much control over them, you're acting as a centaur. What we don't want to create is called a reverse centaur, where the machine's running the human. That's the Amazon warehouse worker, where the machine controls their every movement and penalizes them from deviating from it. You don't get many productivity gains from that, and you introduce some security problems. So I like to use that dichotomy to think about the appropriate roles of these tools in both DevOps as well as in running enterprise systems. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that one.
I've got a quick question about sandbox seeding.
Yeah.
Is that something you guys do, and how do you guys sort of work through all the dependencies if I wanted, like 100 accounts of this record type and 50 accounts of that record type and all the things?
Shall we take a look at it, Nikki?
Sure.
That's probably the easiest thing to do. So we use our data migrator tool to do that. And data migrator has a very simple purpose. It's move data from one sandbox or org to another while potentially anonymizing some of it. And so if you're going to routinely seed those developer and developer pro sandboxes or go refresh things in a full copy or partial copy, you'd set up a template in this tool to do it. And so for products and price books, it'll start with like a root object. And you decide which fields come over and maybe how we treat each field, if we try to mask that field or not. You can also put filters on it and then add absolute record limits too. And it will handle the relationships with automatic record mapping. And so it'll handle the difference in IDs across environments. And then from there, you can add parent and child objects. So for this one, I'm grabbing products and grabbing fields from them. I've got filters for active products as well as matching existing. So what I'm setting up here is what you would probably do with 20 hours of work with Salesforce native tools like Data Loader. And so the idea here is you create these templates, you save it. In fact, I'll call save the template. You go back to the template and then you can run it. And you choose a source. In my case, I'll do production. And choose a target. Maybe I'll go put these in Dev 3. It'll validate that the schema is the same. And it'll tell you if there are any problems. Now it'll create a preview of the data that's going to be migrated and let you confirm and run that data seeding. So if you need to do it over and over and over again, then this is the tool for you. This is also what we use to go and grab your CPQ stuff from your sandbox and push it off to production. We just wouldn't use the anonymization piece in the template there.
So do you guys have like an external ID that gets added to all the objects, or do you
we create a virtual ID and we track the relationship between them, and when we do our inserts, it's there. But you have some additional logic that you can put in there if you really needed to do the upsert. So there's automatic, and then if you do manual, you can do a composite key if needed. But for the most part, you'll get by with automatic.
Okay. So that's just looking at the name field or something?
No, I think it's literally, it may do some matching, but it may have kept track of what it does. I'm trying to remember the technology that is there. It uses an internal mapping on the first migration, then tries to do it. But if you were doing it for the first time, you might do a manual one and then and choose the composite key.
Okay.
We've had a native version of this product for a long time, but this cloud one actually gives performance improvements because there's more processing power and threading control off the Salesforce platform.
So the cloud one, is that with an intention to use it with other technology, like other applications, not just Salesforce?
I'm not sure yet, Nikki. That's something that we'll always hold in reserve. And as Salesforce goes cross-platform, we may consider that. But for now, it's just Salesforce core. Would be interesting, though, too. I just don't know the quirks and weirdness of other platforms that we might have to deal with, right?
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
That was a good question, Nikki. Do you have anything available for Marketing Cloud engagement?
In terms of doing deployments for Marketing Cloud, Brittany, or? Sure,
doing deployments, tracking changes.
Yeah, so our native DevOps product has an add-on to do Marketing Cloud deployments. Now, Salesforce itself is very limited in what it supports in Marketing Cloud deployments, but to the extent that it does, we do support it on native. Our intent is to ultimately add that to Cloud DevOps as well. So you'll see it. at the very least, it gets you version control of your Marketing Cloud metadata as you move it between BUs, right? But the legacy exact target platform wasn't quite as sophisticated for DevOps concepts and migrations as core Salesforce is. Now, I think Salesforce's intent is to take much of Marketing Cloud, start rebuilding it on platform finally, in which case we'll be able to handle it with our existing tools. But for now, we have the Marketing Cloud add-on for native DevOps, as well as add-ons for MuleSoft. We do B2C commerce as well.
Thanks, Joe.
Another question is to follow up on the talking about consulting. So I have a lot of clients that don't really have anything in terms of source control or anything. So I often will use, like Capato has a free version where you can do up to 10 or 15 deployments per month per like org, I guess. And I've got another client that does use GearSet. But how could you see a consultant using this? Like, even if I just said, well, you guys aren't going to keep track of your own changes, but for the things I do, I would like to do that. Would I just have one license of this, and then I could just connect to, you know, if I had 10 different clients, 10 different orgs plus the sandboxes? Or
I think from a technology perspective, that's possible. Scott can talk about the licensing perspective, and I know it's something that we're use case we're thinking of.
Nikki, we do have a different licensing model for consultants. So I know of several that have been in some of my customers where the consultancy manages the deployments for the customer. They have their own Flosum licensing. It's a whole different pricing structure, and the way you set up the environments, of course, you have to segregate between your clients. So it's got that capability as well. If you're interested, I can connect you with one of our alliances team members, and they can talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see, you know, depending on the cost, whatever. So for now, if I had a license, is it tied to my like Salesforce production ID, and then I can connect to sandboxes, or how do you?
It's independent.
Okay.
Yeah. So what you get, Nikki, is a tenant. And in that tenant, you're the administrator, and you can add users and do things like that. And then you connect orgs and you organize them into topologies, maybe one per client or something like that. And that topology is all self-contained.
Okay.
So that when you're in DevOps, you know, you choose a topology to work in here. But from a licensing perspective, that's going to be a different question, right? But you get the technology tenant, and within that tenant, you got the segregation.
Okay.
It's almost like if you think of with one of our normal commercial clients, you'd have a COE perhaps that has a dozen different orgs for different business units or divisions, where the COE accesses everything, but you got different dev teams for a business unit, and you segregate them out. It would be that kind of model with the topologies and such.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.
It's amazing how like multi-org was verboten for years at Salesforce, but we all knew it was a reality, and Salesforce had to embrace it with Data Cloud. We've had to do something similar where we embrace the Salesforce multi-org, and sometimes we have multi-tenant too, right? So we might have a customer with multiple Flosum tenants if need be.
Okay, anything else? Well, we're nearing, I was going to say we'll give you a little time back, but there isn't really much to give back.
Thank you so much to our Flosum team. You all are always so insightful and informative in how we can enhance our careers with Salesforce knowledge and the tools that we need to support them with modern architecture. I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for coming.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See some of you at Salesforce or at Dreamforce. Bye-bye.